Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session, Build Better discussion with Andre Neumann-Loreck, who is founder and managing partner at Ontap, which has been providing consulting services into the electronics manufacturing industry for quite some time. I will maybe let Andre introduce himself a little bit and his background. And today we're going to be talking about materials planning and handling and positioning as it relates to a factory move, if you're considering that. So Andre, welcome and share a little bit about your background.
Thank you so much, Anna. It's great to be here. Looking forward to this discussion. I appreciate the introduction. Yeah, I've spent my career in operations and manufacturing. My first job was working in a factory in Nagano prefecture, Japan. And among other things, I was a line operator there, installing neodymium magnets. I'm glad that we're going to talk about materials planning for factory transition. It was great to collaborate with you on the
Build Better
handbook
Guide
on
to
factory transitions.
factory
And
transition.
yeah, materials planning is an important part of that.
It is, and it's not really covered in the guide. So this is like the appendix section, and you've prepared kind of three kind of core topics that we'll talk about, and then we'll want people to stick around to hear your top 4 tips if you are kind of going to be going through a factory transition. What are the things that Andre's learned from the School of Hard Knocks that you should pay attention to as it relates to where to put these materials? So really excited about this conversation. And I think we'll kick it off by, let's talk about the biggest gotcha on moving factories.
All right, excellent. I think as a starting point, I want to say that in the factory transition handbook, you pointed out that it's important to keep your existing line running while you're bringing up the new line at the new factory. So I think that's an underlying assumption to the gotcha that I'm going to go into. The biggest issue, the biggest gotcha that we've faced and that our clients have faced when they've gone through these kinds of transitions and done the material planning is actually not a material planning issue at all. It's an engineering qualification issue.
Of the materials
Of the
themselves.
materials, that's right, components, subassemblies. Almost certainly, some components and subassemblies will require new sources. That's because there's going to be some components or some subassemblies that are captive to your existing factory, and for the new factory, you'll have to find alternatives. And to get those components or subassemblies qualified will take engineering resource and engineering time. So you need to involve your engineering colleagues in this discussion early. We've seen companies and teams, operations teams, get into trouble when they don't have these discussions with engineering early. And now they've done the sourcing, they have the new parts ready for qualification, and engineering says, we don't have the resources for it. All of our resources are on this mission critical NPI. And if we divert even any resource, we're gonna delay the launch of the product, and we can't afford the revenue hit or the time to market hit, and so we can't help you. And now your whole plan is in jeopardy.
Yeah, got it. So essentially, you're looking at trying to figure out the long lead time items for the critical path. And in this case, it's time. It's team time, your
Right.
engineering time, and getting those control runs reviewed, reliability testing reviewed and approved. Have you seen in those bring up of additional sources, have you seen that go very badly where actually, yeah, like the control runs are necessary because you do find problems in that bring up process?
Yeah, it can happen because that if it's a particularly if there's something tricky in the manufacturing process for the component or the subassembly, and your existing factory has dealt with it because either in-house they're vertically integrated or they have a captive supplier, like they've figured stuff out
Yeah.
that you are
They
not
like
going to be privy to.
negotiated between themselves, like what
Right.
the actual specs are.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and now you're trying to replicate that with only half of the know-how or knowledge. So it can be tricky. It can be trickier than you might think.
Is there an underlying assumption that I think like from first principles, as I would think about this, again, I have not done this before. So like I'm only thinking first principles around, it seems to me you'd want to like from a scientific method perspective, you'd want to isolate the variables of like new suppliers on critical components with new line that's never built this product and completely new operators and new jigs and like it that those feel separable. Some variables are not controllable and separable. So is there also a recommendation around trying to somehow source elements of your original supply chain that you can use in that second factory? Is it just like not feasible because of those captive supplier issues?
In general, I think the recommendation, yes, the recommendation would be try to make as few changes to the AVL, the approved vendor list, as possible. So this is not your opportunity to bring in all the low cost vendors. It's hard enough to bring
Okay.
up a new line and a new factory without introducing all those other changes.
So just focus on the captive vendors that you cannot move. You have no
Exactly.
other options. And then if you want to do cost down or like tariff engineering as it relates to moving parts around, you do that in the second phase after the factory's
Exactly. Yeah, that's a
okay.
separate issue. Your comments remind me of another important related point to this materials planning, which is particularly if you're introducing a new supplier because you're replacing somebody that was captive for your first factory, you have to get the new factory involved in this discussion earlier. So we talked about how you have to get your engineering team on board to do the quals and build that into the timeline. You also have to get the new factory involved. We've also seen this where we've done the work. I've gotten burned with this when you talk about School of Hard Knocks. You think you've got it all covered because you were smart enough to get engineering involved and build it into your timeline, and now the parts are qualified, and you go to the new factory and you say, here's the supplier and the qualified part, and the new factory says, yeah, we're not going to work with those guys. We worked with them 5 years ago and they stiffed us, and we're never going to work with them again. And if we see them on the street, we'll shoot them on sight.
Yeah,
So
it's
then what?
important to figure that out. It's also important as you're talking about this around bringing in engineering early, or at least putting it on their kind of roadmap or resource planning plan.
Yeah.
There's the other kind of problem of general secrecy. And we'll kind of maybe touch on that, I think, in your third point here. But that's tricky because you kind of want to talk to your engineering team, but maybe you really only want to talk to engineering leadership, because the more people who know about a move, the more likely it is that your site one factory finds out in a way that maybe does not support your mission and objectives in the best
Yes.
possible way.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up here, and it's in the handbook as well. And I think that as it relates to the material planning, the important point to know is that your existing factory will find out. It is important that you keep it secret
To a point.
and until you have a plan built out and a communications plan figured out, and until you're ready to let the existing factory know. But look, they are going to find out. And if you don't tell them, they are going to find out from the supply chain.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a lot worse than if they hear it from you. And um, you can manage through it with them better if they hear it from you.
Yeah, good point. All right. So the next kind of part of this is around suppliers. And you just kind of talked about the supply chain and how the supply chain may find out some things here or need to be part of this plan. So what happens when you are bringing up your second site and you're trying to position materials as
Yeah.
it relates to your upstream suppliers? How could
Right.
they
Okay.
react?
Perfect. So it will get confusing for your suppliers. So if you think about the assumption we talked about at the beginning, which is that you're going to keep your existing line running until your new line at the new factory is up and proven. And if people want to find out more about that, they should read the handbook. But let's go with that assumption. And if you are not communicating closely with your suppliers, you're just loading them up with additional purchase orders and forecasts to support your existing volumes at your current factory and the ramp up at the new factory, they're going to see a significant increase, maybe a doubling of volume, and they're going to be confused. What's going on? Right? They're going to, and they may call you about it, but they also may call your existing factory about it. So this links back to the secrecy point. If you don't manage this, they're going to pick up the phone and call the existing factory. Hey, what's going on? We just received this big, increase in orders, and so the cat will be out of the bag.
Yeah. So in terms of mitigating that, it's a proactive communication with the suppliers. And then what if the suppliers are somewhat constrained? Like, because just doubling the volume, maybe that's possible if it's like a die cut part, but like for some parts that may not be immediately possible. Are you making new tooling? Like, what are you doing to, what kinds of things should be thinking about in your planning, I guess, as it relates to like doubling your supply for some short,
Yeah.
ephemeral, hopefully, period of time?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great question. I think it's an underappreciated art to managing the scaling of a supply chain. Um, it One of the things that we challenge operations teams to do is to understand that at any point what the supply chain is capable of. So you want to know for your key components and sub-assemblies, what are the capacities of those factories that you're using, and what are the capacities of the line. So you have one line at a component supplier or a sub-assembly supplier. How long does it take them to establish a second line? What are the lead times for that? So you want to go into the material planning process with some knowledge of that already. If you don't have that, then it's a much heavier lift because you have to figure that stuff out. Can they do what you need them to do to bring up the second line?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right. And then getting back to making sure your factory finds out from you and not from the supply chain. Why is it important for that to be the case?
Um, so you're going to need your existing factories cooperation in this process. So when you communicate to them, we're moving factories, the ideal outcome is that they say, okay, we understand why you're doing it, and we'll work with you to make the transition as smooth as possible. That's what you want them to say. Well, they're not going to say that if they feel like you're screwing them over, if they feel like they haven't had a chance to perform.
Yeah.
Just like an individual that might be working on your team, if you have to fire somebody for a performance, it shouldn't be a surprise, right? It's like every person, every factory deserves an opportunity to perform. So if you get to that point where you're going to be moving factories, you want they may not be happy about it, but you want them to be understanding. We had every chance to perform. We weren't able to meet your expectations on whatever, on increasing capacity, on pricing, on whatever it might have been. And so you want them to cooperate with you and continue the existing line until you're ready for it to stop. You want it to be on your plan. You don't want them to, in a reactionary way, to say, okay, you know what? Then we're pulling the plug. We're going to stop the line now. We're going to bill you for all the excess, material and WIP. That's going to cause a continuity of supply issue for you, and it's going to be a really messy and expensive negotiation. So you don't want it to be a surprise. You don't want them to hear about it from the suppliers. You want them to hear about it from you in a way that is controlled and empathetic and collaborative.
And then as it relates to places where your interests are aligned or misaligned from your final assembly factory, the rest of the supply chain, what do you think are important for folks to keep in mind?
I want to touch on one other topic related to the communication to the supply base
Yeah.
before we talk about the misalignment
Okay.
of interest. I think sort of the broad point I want to make is that this will be a confusing time for suppliers. They're going to be, you're asking them to do something different from what they usually do. They're going to have to support their existing factory. They have to create a relationship with the new factory. They have to figure out from shipment to shipment what's going where. The SKU mix may be different. So you're asking them to do some unnatural acts. And it's easy for them to get confused. They need to be, there needs to be a lot of good communication so that they stay on track. And you want to also make sure that they're not reacting to news without your instructions. So we've seen this happen where um, maybe there's a check build and it doesn't go as well as you think in the new factory, and an engineer says in passing to the salesperson, "Oh, we may need a second check build," and the next thing you know, the factory has pushed the material for the ramp because, well, the engineer said there's going to be a second check build. But that was an engineer's like reaction in the moment. It wasn't a decision that your company had taken. And it may or may not be what you want, that action may or not be what you want the factory to do. So what I want to illustrate is with that example is just another way that the suppliers can get confused when you're working through these material plans.
Yeah, it seemed really important to be very proactive because you can't control your engineers from saying things like that and making confusion. So
That's
regular
right. Yeah,
checkpoints probably,
exactly. Yeah,
and
and we'll get to
clarity.
some of that when we get to the tips.
Okay.
But
Okay, cool. So um, interest alignments,
okay,
misalignments, alignments with your final assembly factory and potentially your suppliers. What's important?
this is a hot button of mine because I think a lot of companies that are buying from factories around the world just assume that their interests are aligned when it's just simply not the case. And when we're discussing a factory transition, bringing up a new line at a new factory, it's especially pronounced. Yes, you want that rep to be successful, and they do also. So that's true, right? There's alignment there. Um, One point of misalignment is that you believe in your plan, and probably they don't. They probably don't believe that you're going to hit your plan. And the reason they think that is because most companies don't hit the plan.
Yeah. They've been trained to know not to
Right.
believe in the plan.
So they don't think you're going to hit your plan. And what do they care about? One of the things that they care about, it's different from your concerns, is they care about inventory. They don't want to be holding inventory. And their buyers, the buyers at your new factory, are measured on inventory. And if they're holding inventory at the end of the month or at the end of the quarter, they get dinged. Like it's a big deal. So they're instructed not to hold, not to have over inventory positions, which is counter to what we want. So let me illustrate it this way. And if you have a lead time, a component lead time that's 8 to 12 weeks, sometimes you'll get like that, a supplier will quote a lead time with that kind of a span, 8 to 12 weeks, right? When would you order the part?
I would 12 weeks before.
That's
But
right.
that inventory person's gonna order 8 weeks before.
Exactly. That's right. That's exactly right. And we see this over and over again. The factory buyer will order at 8 weeks and chase the part. They'd rather, why? Because they don't believe in your plan. You're not going to hit your plan anyway.
Mm.
And they'd rather be chasing the parts than be in an over inventory position and get dinged at the end of the month or at the end of the quarter. So even something as basic as like, when does the new factory buyer place the orders has to get micromanaged. Because if there's a 8 to 12 week or an 8 to 10 week quote on lead time, they're not going to order it when you want unless you're breathing down their neck. So that's an example of that misalignment. If you execute your plan, like we want to believe in you, and you have to believe in yourself, right? You're gonna make your plan happen and you plan for success. So this comes to fruition, you're ready to ramp. If you haven't micromanaged materials, not just the materials that you consign to the factory, but also the materials that the factory buyer is responsible for, you're going to have shortages.
At site too.
Yes,
And so, got it. So it's like you must be very proactive about making sure you have enough materials at site to be ready to go.
exactly.
All right. Any other like misalignments there between interests between you? That's like a misalignment between you and site two, like the new factory.
Yeah.
I would imagine there's also misalignments between you and site one. Particularly if you're going to like, I mean, there's different types of transitions. Like you could transition from, you know, EMS in China and then the same EMS as their site in Vietnam, right? Like,
Mhm.
and that's maybe like slightly better because you're not firing the company. You're kind of like maybe you're transitioning for tariffs. It's explainable. Like maybe people are not offended, but like for that site, they're going to lose money on their P&L. Like somebody's,
Yes.
that's a like an impact for them. And then there's a transition where like literally firing an EMS and getting a different EMS, even if it's in another location or not.
Yeah.
And, I think that is a different situation. And I imagine in that second situation, there's like some protectionism of like, well, this is our stuff. Like, what's ours? What's yours? And, those documents that you've probably, hopefully hashed out very carefully at the beginning,
Yeah.
like become really important in figuring out whose is what's and like what can you take and what can you not take? What is yours?
Yeah.
Um, and then there can be lots of things that, we might disagree on whether it's yours or not. And I imagine a factory will feel that like, this is our IP. We invested in developing this IP or co-developing this IP.
Mhm.
I don't know if you have any thoughts or advice around other kinds of interests to keep in mind as it relates to Site One.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot to unpack there. Well, let me start on the point around IP. If you've done a good job with your master service agreement and your relationship with the first factory, then the IP ownership should be pretty clear. That the design is yours, manufacturing process is theirs, and probably if you've worked on some things jointly, then that IP is jointly held. Um, Often, in practice, it's not quite as clean as that, and you can get into scraps even on getting the access to the SOPs on each
The work
station,
instructions.
the
Yeah.
work instructions. Yeah, like that should be pretty clear that that's yours, but it can be contentious. So it's good to it's good. It's just good practice to stay on top of that anyway. Um, you should have a copy of the work instructions for every station, as part of your records anyway. You don't want to be trying to go and get that at the end when things are contentious.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. All
Um,
right.
the
Oh,
other thing you mentioned, just to jump back to an earlier point you made there a moment ago, a misalignment. It's the same misalignment that we see at end of life of a product, which this it's not from your perspective, it's not end of life. You're just moving it to a different factory, but from the factory's perspective, it's very similar to an end of life episode for them. And I imagine you've seen this also. Um, there's all kinds of stuff comes out of the woodwork at end of life at a factory. So you're going to bring that line, the existing line in the current factory down. That's effectively, end of lifing that line. There's going to be all kinds of stuff that comes up. Your interest is, I'm responsible for the stuff I've ordered. That's it. And then suddenly you're going to find that they're going to want to charge you for all kinds of other things. They're going to be like, we have this, MRB over, materials review board over here, and there's all this material, this discrepant material that's in the hopper, and here's why you have to pay for it. Here's all the excess material that you didn't know about. Oh yeah, if you check our contract, you check the MSA, it says that if we are up against an MOQ, a minimum order quantity, we're allowed to order ahead of your purchase order coverage in order to meet your forecast. And so, here's a bill for $50,000 for this, material or whatever. Oh, and by the way, the material that we're going to charge you $50,000 for, it's down rev, so you can't even use it at your new factory. So this is an example of like some of the misalignment that'll happen with your existing factory to your earlier question.
In a healthy end of life situation where literally that factory has gotten the next generation of the product and there's like an ongoing relationship, do they still ding you for that stuff? Or is that like a unique element of like kind of having this situation where they're going to lose business?
Yeah, it's much worse if there's no ongoing business. If there's lots of ongoing business, then
And
as
you
the
negotiate.
buyer, you have a ton of leverage. You don't want to, yeah, you don't want to, you want to award them business, the new business as late as possible so that you have leverage for these kind of discussions.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
All right. You have prepared your top 4 tips and
Yes.
takeaways for our audience. So let's go through them. Let's hear it from
All
the
right.
School of
So
Hard Knocks.
excellent. The first one is micromanage the factories. You want to make sure that there's clear reporting from the factories. You want to make sure that you're checking on confirmation. I mentioned micromanaging the buyer at the new factory to make sure they're launching orders when you want them to be launched. Yeah, we've gotten down into the weeds. Not only do you micromanage the launching of orders, but then their suppliers come back with confirmations. So you ask them, where do you have those confirmations? And then and where are they missing? Okay, now you've got a list of the confirmations that are missing. And now what's the clear to build? Meaning what's the material you have on hand, and the items that are not on the clear to build, those are the items that are getting expedited. You want to have that level of visibility if you're really intent on continuity of supply, because otherwise they'll do the expediting and they're going to tell you they don't have the materials on the day they were supposed to do the build. Oh, we can't do the build today. We're only going to do half of it because we don't have the materials. And you didn't even have a chance to deploy your team to help in expediting because you weren't close enough to it.
Yeah.
So people say, well, it feels like that feels overbearing. Micromanagement has a bad.
Especially as like a new relationship too,
Yeah,
right? Like you're
right.
still
It's a new
maybe even
relationship.
figuring each other out.
Right, right. And we don't like to micromanage. We've been trained to feel badly about that. We're supposed to trust them to do their jobs. Often the buyers, I was just talking to a client earlier this week, and they have a new buyer assigned to their project, and it's a junior buyer that's never done purchasing before. And this happens all the time. Like there's junior people, there's a lot of turnover in these factories. These are considered junior positions. And so, yeah, you can't assume that they're going to do it right. You have to micromanage. So that's the first tip.
Are very actionable, very actionable.
The second tip is to keep your suppliers and your factories informed. You have a plan of record, and that plan may or may not change. You've got to make sure that you have an ongoing avenue for dialogue and discussion. We gave the example earlier where an engineer out of frustration might say, "Oh, we're going to need a second check build." Well, if you have regular calls with your supplier, then that can come up, and you can say, "Hey, we're moving from the check build to the next phase, or we're going to do a second check build." There'll be an automatic place where that can get caught, and you can set the record straight on what you're trying to do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Um, I've remember we were working with one client that was having trouble with the factory, and so we said, well, are you doing how frequently are you doing the regular calls with the factory? Is it weekly? And I'm thinking we should move from weekly to maybe twice a week or daily. And they're like, wait, we're not doing regular calls. And so, yeah,
It
shit
seems
happens.
obvious, but like, okay, at least weekly.
Right. And at least weekly, because things are going to happen. There's going to be hiccups and they need to be discussed, and you have to get on the same page.
Yeah.
Um, the next tip is around tooling.
Okay.
So the situation often comes up that there's some life on the tools. You've spent a lot of money on the tools with your existing factory, and there might be some life left on those tools. And so can you transfer them?
Like if you're going to transfer suppliers into your final assembly because they're
You get
captive suppliers. This is
the
back.
hard tool, you're going to transfer the hard tooling from
Yep.
your existing factory to the new factory. Like that's the question. Should you do that or not? And
Very tempting.
it's a lot of money and it's tempting. And I've done it as an operator myself. We've worked with clients that have done it, and my recommendation is don't do it.
Okay. Tell us why.
It's it is very hard to move tooling. Um, it's your existing factory isn't set up to move it, and so it's easy to damage the tool. Um, they they're also part of that is that they're not super motivated. They're kind of they're the people in the working in the tool shop. They're probably pissed off about like this extra work. Like why? What are you asking me to do? If the tool isn't handled gingerly, if it's not packed properly, um, yeah, and even if it is, even if they are trying to be careful, it's still easy to damage the tool. Often we've also found that the tooling is optimized for your first factory's machines and processes and technicians. And so it shows up at the new factory, and the new factory is like, what is this? This isn't how we do it.
Yeah, and there's like an ownership element. If the factory has made the tool, they got to make it work. Otherwise, there's like a reputational
Yes,
pride element to it.
right.
Whereas Site 2 is almost incentivized because
Yeah,
they want you to buy new tools, or they're almost incentivized because of their own, like we're better. So like this is terrible.
yeah,
And then you
yes,
probably hear about it like constantly. And there's probably also like, well, they want you to pay for, maybe they wanted you to try to pay for scrap or something like that, that like their
yes.
tools wouldn't have.
Exactly. Yeah, there's yield implications, the cost implications. It's a little bit like giving software code from one engineer to another.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this does happen in professional engineering. You have to be able to maintain other people's code, but certainly there's a pride of ownership. If
Right.
it's your code and
Yeah,
it's causing a problem, yeah, like there's an ownership kind of there.
exactly.
That's like, of
Well
course
said.
you have to fix it. That's interesting. So like these would be for captive suppliers who you really can't use. So you can't even like do the rest of the shots off this tool and then like just ship those parts because they're captive to the original factory.
Yeah, that's probably the case. And
Yeah.
you also you
Does
want
this
the
mean like essentially for the large tools and large tool cost, you should find suppliers that are not your FATP site suppliers to have like, or like that are captive to their supply chain? Like if you're building a consumer electronic device, it's going to have a plastic enclosure. Like do your plastic enclosure tooling with like complex slides, whatever. Do it at a supplier that if you needed the optionality to move, you can move. Like,
it's an interesting question. I like the strategic thinking on that. I haven't done it. I do think that yeah, we've had clients that have done something similar to that, not because they wanted the optionality of being able to move factories, but because their tooling was especially complex and the factory they selected for other reasons didn't have the
capability or know-how.
capability to meet the tolerances or have the specific, capability to do what they wanted on the plastic injection molding. So then they found their own plastic injection molding supplier. We helped them bring that tool up there, and it was done for different reasons, but it would if you did that, yes, it would give you that optionality. I think my preference is that if your factory, if your CM can technically do the plastic injection molding in-house and meet your requirements, there's advantages to having them do that. There's less margin stack up. They should be able to do it more cost effectively. And we'll apply your earlier argument here also. They'll have ownership in making sure that it works.
Yeah, you'll probably get like you still get the second drawing, like They like essentially agree on what things they tune it in so it works for them.
Right.
Yeah, I guess my experience coming from Apple is that like there was always a separation with the exception of like die cuts
Mhm.
and maybe some small parts that were not of particular value or every part's important, but they were not like complicated or
Yeah.
complex. There wasn't like know-how. So like stamped parts maybe would be, if it's not complicated stamped parts, but like simple brackets, stuff like this, that
Yeah.
would be acceptable to have like be a captive vendor.
Mhm.
But everything else was external, and even die cuts there was like a favorite vendor that
Yeah.
like for whatever reason like all the PDs really just wanted to work with that vendor because it was just the easiest vendor to work with, but the prices were probably triple like what some captive vendor would be, so eventually it would get cost down in
Yeah.
in during production.
Yeah.
But I hadn't even thought about so like CMs that actually have in-house injection molding capability. It does seem like there would be advantages there but risks too. So important, I
Yes.
guess, while you're making
Yeah.
those calls like up
Yes.
front,
Yeah.
if you know, like particularly if you're starting a new factory relationship for a new product, you're not even moving right now. You're just like, it's a new product, new factory relationship. You're kind of figuring all this out and you're thinking about the things that might happen over the next
Mhm.
3.8 years that could influence your market and where you want to be building, and you don't have a crystal ball so you can't predict, maybe it's maybe the optionality is of value to you if that's like the state of your business is such that you can invest in extra costs or complexity in order to have optionality, versus if the state of your business is we need to get this stuff out as soon as possible because I need to demonstrate this kind of revenue growth or et cetera, and you have like different things you're optimizing for. So
Yes, exactly. Yeah, well said.
all right. And then I think that was just three. So is there a last one?
There's one more, and this is another personal hot button of mine, which is provide your new factory with a 12-month rolling forecast. You know, a lot of ops teams, especially for the startups that we work with, find this hard. They're like, I don't have a 12-month forecast from my marketing and sales people, or, the marketing and sales is run by our CEO, and like they're not giving us a rolling 12-month forecast. So I don't have anything to give to the supplier. I mentioned that my first job was working for a manufacturing company in Japan. So I was on the factory side. And I can tell you what happens on the factory side is that they will make it up. If you don't give them a rolling forecast of your demand, they will make it up. They can't, like the salespeople that work for that factory, they can't go back to their management and to their factory planners and say, yeah, we asked them for the forecast, but they didn't give us one. Sorry. Like they will make it up. And so it's better that you make it up and give it to them. In this case, your
At least you
guess
know
is
what it
better
is
than
then.
theirs. Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. And how does that like, how can that come and bite you if they've made it up and you're not aware of that?
Well, if
That
if
bite
if they've made it up, they're going to get it wrong, and they're probably, the place where it bites you is if you're as successful as you want to be, you've got a great ramp planned, um, and you're executing to that. You will have interruptions in supply if they have second guessed your forecast.
because they're gonna knock your numbers down.
Yeah, yeah,
Because
exactly.
no one hits their plan. So back to that point, they're gonna knock
Right.
your numbers down.
Right. So even if you give them a forecast, there's a lot of work you have to do. It's not enough to give them the forecast. You have to give them the forecast, and you have to be able to
Convince them that it's
convince
like
them, right? Prove, like, we're meeting our numbers. Like, here's why it's going to jump. Here's our go-to-market strategy, right? Here's where we're adding these customers with our consumer electronics product. Here's where we're expanding from D2C to brick and mortar retail. That's why we've got this jump, right? You explain it to them so that they don't market, they don't discount your forecast. They still might do that, but less. The better you are at your explanations, the better chance of bringing them along. And if you're not providing them with a forecast, then almost certainly, they're gonna they're going to guess low, and you're going to have continuity of supply problems.
Yeah, could be an issue. Awesome. Well, this is great. This is a great summary of some things to keep in mind as it relates to materials planning and positioning those materials in a factory transition. Thank you so much, Andre, for spending some time with us to write this extra chapter onto the guide.
Yes, and it's been great speaking with you. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
All right. Okay, cut.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, I think there's good stuff in there. Um, yeah, there's probably one little section in there we can cut out. We'll cut out where I pushed you forward and you want to go back. We'll just cut that out because that's why I repeated the question again because I
Yeah,
figured
okay.
we'll just cut the thingy and then like I think otherwise it's great all the way through. So I'm excited about it. And maybe we should like write that little thing and stick that in into the guide now that you've like done the thinking on what it could be. So we'll take a look at this transcript and maybe write something up based on this to see if we can augment it. Cause I think it's a
Okay.
good point. When you first mentioned it, I was like, oh yeah, you need to figure out I like even just how many parts to ship to factory one.
Yeah.
Cause like, are you going to meet your own plan for bring up on factory two? Like, no. So
Yes.
so many things go wrong. I think there's a lot of it's a very challenging problem. I'm just curious, this off the record, but like I'm just curious, like I imagine that this was the SVB bank run moment for hardware companies building in Mexico.
Yeah.
So, and that was probably pretty stressful. What's kind of the vibes on people thinking about tariffs and moves, and I feel like it almost reinforces wait and see because
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes. I feel that's what I'm getting. We have a number of our clients are running product in Mexico, and yeah, some were building ahead, trying to get ahead of the curve a bit. But I think now there's this general wait and see attitude. And I feel like the Mexico, I don't know if it's justified or not, but the companies that have a Mexico supply chain seem to be more calm about it than the China supply chain people.
Well, the China supply chain people have no excuse because I mean this is since 2018. If this is still a surprise, then like
Yeah.
like that one feels pretty obvious. I mean, Canada was pretty stunning, but probably not like a ton of Canadian supply chain, although we get our cameras from Canada, but that's fine. We have like plenty. Um, but yeah, kind of an interesting. I mean, you still have to have the plans, you still have to be ready to go, but now it's almost like made it so that people will probably wait to, even if something does come down, probably wait, especially like as we think about, because he hasn't even started talking about Vietnam and Malaysia, and
And
they were
Europe.
and they were part of the original,
Hmm.
blanket, I guess one negotiation at a time. And like the world is watching these negotiations. So,
Yeah.
then what's next? I imagine that if and when those kind of come down, that it'll be a little bit more like, okay, well, let's wait and see what happens because maybe something will happen like very soon.
Yeah.
But business hates uncertainty. So it's just very interesting, like the state of
Yeah.
uncertainty. Um, yeah,
I think you're right. Human beings hate uncertainty, and we'll
Oh, they
we'll choose.
do, but
Yeah,
businesses do too. Like,
businesses do too.
businesses like to be able to predict numbers and hit numbers. And if the stock market is your KPI, which I think is one of the core KPIs of our current
Mhm.
administration, then, like they need to hit their numbers. And if you have this ambiguity, yeah, I forgot to ask this morning we did a tariff webinar this morning. I forgot to ask like if iPhones were on the list for the 10%. Uh,
Oh, yeah, I
I
don't know
think
the
they
answer.
are.
Yeah.
I
Did you
think
guys
they
talk about, I didn't have a chance to sit in. Did you guys talk about the de minimis rule and these like small packages from China?
a tiny bit because we didn't think it was super applicable to like many of in the
Mhm.
customer base. But I'm actually like as a US consumer, I'm actually kind of glad about that. Um,
Why is that?
well, I just think like Temu and Shein are bad for humanity.
Okay.
And
Okay.
so it's really coming on that. I I find it regrettable that it could have impacts on like importing prototypes.
Mhm.
That doesn't, but it sounded like Gabrielle had thoughts on how prototypes could be somehow like gotten through some other
Mhm.
whatever that like they wouldn't be subject.
Yeah.
Um, but
Historically,
that's
that's been
usually not,
true.
but it's usually not worth it for like $30 or
Yeah.
whatever whatever it is.
Right.
Um, yeah, I know, but like you brought it up, so I'm interested. What's your take or what's your reading of the situation?
Uh, yeah, I think, well, I was just stunned when I saw the news that the, USPS wasn't going to handle the handle the small parcels. And of course, they had to reverse that because it's just ridiculous. But I don't know how they're going to enforce it. Even FedEx and UPS handles a lot of those small parcel shipments from China. We've been involved in some supply chain design where we help companies like figure out how they can do those small partial shipments from China, bring them in. I don't know if they're still doing this, but like that they would get packaged as small parcel shipments. They would get brought into bulk into places like Anchorage, Alaska, and then broken down into the individual shipments and then sent from there as a
Oh,
way to get past
as a
this.
way to like do get past the yeah, I mean, I think it's actually the combination. Like personally, I think the Shein Temu thing, it's a combination of that plus like whatever international postage thing that like classifies China as a developing nation. I think like that's actually the thing that should probably be fixed.
Yeah,
But de minimis at least helps.
yeah,
I just think like Shein and Temu are bad for the
I
planet.
agree.
Just like
I see your
shipping
point.
plastic
Yeah,
and
yeah,
like and I don't actually and my husband was like, "Oh, but there's certain people that like this help if they like are in a hard spot financially, they can like get clothes for really cheap." And I was just like, I don't think people are buying clothes that like only last 3 wears. If you're in that situation, you're probably looking for stuff in like Goodwill or thrift store that's going to last a long time.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and
I agree.
and so I actually just think it's consumerism that it stops, and I think that's good for like brick and mortar stores. And
Yeah. All right, good. You've
I
convinced
mean,
me.
to the
I have a
extent that I'm
different.
a nationalist as it relates to, I'd rather like Amazon do well than Temu do well, I guess. Like,
Yeah. Although I saw something that really surprised me that in Q4 of last year, um, more dollar volume was sold by Chinese companies on Amazon
yeah,
than any
like
other.
I was also hoping that it would get rid of all of the drop shippers on Amazon
Yeah.
because it's so annoying to search for things. And like maybe that would go away and we get like old Amazon search back. So
Yeah.
I was just seeing like all these positive benefits
Good.
associated with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I understand that it's yeah, we didn't spend a lot of time talking about it other than like if you're using it for prototypes, there's a way to maybe get your prototypes like exempted out. But yeah. So.
One other thing I want to mention, we are seeing more interest in India, and to the point where we've added a senior consultant um, with a lot of India experience and India contacts.
Okay, good to know. Good to know.
Yeah.
We have yet to do a deployment in India.
All right. So
Yet.
there you go. Something new
I'm
to look for.
I'm yeah, I think like I mean, I know the super big companies are obviously that's like a place they had to go. And also because there's probably doesn't India have protectionist tariffs like Brazil does? I think they do. So if you want to sell to the Indian market, I think you have to like make them in India.
That could
Um,
be.
I think for like iPhones anyway.
Mhm.
I think that's why iPhone is made there. We've certainly seen interest from like EMS in India where they're like,
Mhm.
shit, we got like all this, we gotta make stuff for Apple and we don't know how, and like we need AI to help us. Like we've certainly gotten like stuff like that, which is kind of interesting. Um, but yeah, I think we have been really focused over the last month on the even though our marketing suggests otherwise on the tariff thing, because we've been waiting to see like what happens
Mhm.
on all the investment in the data centers, like that, like Stargate AI plus
Yeah.
like the 80 billion from Satya, like, and everybody like throwing their billions around. And at first I thought like all of that was going to go towards construction and permitting and whatnot. But like actually it looks like 75% of that will be spent on data center stuff. And I don't know if you
Mm.
have any exposure to that market, but like, man, they need help. Guess what first pass yield is at like functional test on a blade, on a server blade?
I have no idea.
Well, one site we're in that's customer, it is 0%. I think industry standard is 15%.
Oh my gosh, that's awful. That's like they're still in development at that point.
Also like SMT yields, they are not 98%. They're like 80, 75.
Oh my
Like
goodness.
I was like, these are problems we've solved. Like this is SMT. Like it's just
Yeah.
like like it's
Yeah.
like you're putting down a oh 01, like it's not even like tiny little 01005s. These are like big honking stuff we've been doing for decades. So like that's fascinating. And then just like yeah, it's fascinating industry. It's super broken, and literally they're going to have to scale 10 to 30x, and they cannot scale what they have because you cannot scale 15% for spec yield.
Yeah. Why do you think it's so bad?
Um, I don't know yet. I've seen the Paretos, and there are lots of things instrumental can help with. So like I'm feeling great. I feel like I'll have better instinct on that soon. Um, I think there's like a lot of interconnects. A lot of
Mhm.
the issues are from interconnects. And you would think you have these massive interconnects. These are like the big, it's not like little boards. It's like these huge honking
Mhm.
things. So you would think you could get those connected, or that somebody would like invent a connector that the light goes on when it's connected or something. But like, yeah, that's my invention idea. I need to like patent that.
Right.
Because inside a blade, you could have 148 cables, which means you have double that in interconnects,
Yeah. Yeah.
like on either side. And then I think like they don't really do MPI the right way, like we
Mhm.
do, like we understand. And so there's not really like a design for assembly. They kind of
Mhm.
just like take the other design and like cram more stuff in. And so
Mhm.
like nobody's measured like how big is the human fingers. And
Mhm.
like how there would be processes in China where you're like, okay, well, this assembler needs to be a small, petite woman because we need
Right.
little fingers. And we're
Yeah.
like, this guy's sausage fingers. He's gonna go down there. Like we used to kind of move people because of like finger size.
Yeah.
And I think that that's not a thing they do. And so you have like, people are trying to jam these connections in. And as they're like putting it in and pulling their fingers out, like they're pulling up.
Mhm.
Um,
Oh my goodness.
and then also they pump liquids through them.
Mhm.
And it's not just the piping, like the piping is one thing. Some of them they like do immersion. So they literally take this thing that's going to have 15% or 0% first pass yield, and it's in goo before they test it. And then they have to do repair and debug on
Oh my
something that's
gosh.
covered in goo.
That's awful.
And like the looping between repair and test, because there's not enough test capacity because test is super expensive.
Mhm.
Test is 14 hours. And the looping could be 7 times before they actually figure out like how to fix it. It's like so broken, dude. Like I
Oh
don't
my
know if there's any angle you guys could have. Should totally get yourself some exposure to this market. They have lots
Okay. All
of
right.
them,
I'm gonna
and it's
I'm gonna
all
think about it.
local. It's
Yeah.
all local. Like we're in a line in Santa Clara, and
Mhm.
it's like they're building all this stuff in America, and some of it's in Mexico. But it's like this, I think, actually Trump. If I was Trump, which I'm not, but like if I had the Trumpy mindset about this, I would say that all of these servers need to be built in the US. It's already kind of dictated by probably the contracts to the hyperscalers because they don't want spy chips in their stuff,
Mhm.
although they're still spy chips. They're just American spy chips in their stuff.
Yeah.
So they've already kind of dictated that, but I do actually think like the US is suitable for server manufacturing in a way that like we couldn't build phones here.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so
That makes sense. All right. Well, thanks for sharing that. I'm going to take a look at that sector more closely now.
all right, have a good
Very
time.
fun.
See
Great
ya.
talking with you. Take
Bye.
care. Bye now.